In this episode, we shift from identifying, analyzing, and treating risk into the equally important work of explaining risk clearly to the people who need to make decisions about it. That may sound less technical than some other parts of risk management, but in many organizations, it is one of the most difficult and most important skills to develop. A risk program can produce excellent analysis, thoughtful treatment plans, and useful indicators, yet still fail to create real value if leaders, managers, and other stakeholders do not understand what the information means or what they should do next. Reporting risk information to stakeholders is really about turning complex conditions, changing exposure, and control realities into communication that helps people make better choices. For a beginner, the key idea is that risk reporting is not simply sending a document, updating a dashboard, or reading a list of concerns in a meeting. It is the discipline of presenting the right information in the right way to the right audience so that risk becomes understandable, discussable, and actionable rather than vague, overwhelming, or easy to ignore. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A useful starting point is understanding what risk information actually includes, because beginners sometimes imagine that reporting means giving stakeholders a single score or a short list of major problems. In reality, risk information can include far more than that. It may involve the description of a risk, the business process or asset affected, the likelihood of an event, the possible impact, current control conditions, progress on treatment plans, changes in exposure over time, emerging concerns, and the level of uncertainty that still remains even after review and response. Sometimes it also includes trends from key risk indicators, KRIS, observations from control assessments, and explanations of why a certain issue matters more now than it did earlier. Good reporting does not dump all of that information into one place without structure. Instead, it selects and organizes what is most useful for the stakeholder receiving it. That matters because the value of risk reporting comes not from how much information is shared, but from how clearly the information helps a stakeholder understand the current situation and decide whether more attention, support, escalation, or action is needed. The word stakeholder is also worth slowing down and understanding clearly, because the audience for risk reporting is rarely one uniform group with one shared need. A stakeholder is anyone who has a responsibility, interest, decision-making role, or meaningful exposure tied to the risk being discussed. That may include senior leaders, business managers, process owners, control owners, project sponsors, operational teams, and governance groups. Some stakeholders need high-level summaries because they are making strategic decisions across many competing priorities. Others need more detail because they are responsible for execution, oversight, or follow-up within a specific area. One of the most common mistakes beginners make is assuming that a single report can serve everyone equally well. In practice, different stakeholders need different levels of detail, different kinds of language, and different degrees of emphasis on timing, action, or business consequence. Reporting becomes far more effective when the person preparing it asks what this stakeholder truly needs to understand, what decision or responsibility they hold, and what level of context will help them act wisely instead of merely acknowledging receipt. That brings us to one of the most important lessons in the topic, which is that risk reporting is really a decision support activity. The goal is not just to inform people that a risk exists. The goal is to support judgment. If a report does not help stakeholders understand what is happening, why it matters, what is changing, and what choices may now need attention, then it may be technically complete and still fall short of its purpose. This is why strong risk reporting usually connects information to business impact, priorities, timing, and next steps rather than presenting exposure as an isolated security matter. A stakeholder often needs to know not only that a control is weaker than expected, but also what that means for service reliability, customer trust, financial exposure, legal obligation, or planned business activity. For a beginner, this is an important change in mindset. Reporting is not a final administrative step after the real work is done. It is part of the real work because leaders depend on it to understand whether current risk remains acceptable, whether treatment is progressing as planned, and whether the organization is carrying more uncertainty than it should. Clarity is therefore one of the strongest qualities in good risk reporting. A report may contain accurate facts and still fail if it uses language that is too technical, too abstract, or too dense for the intended audience. This is especially common when people who are close to the analysis assume everyone else shares the same vocabulary and context. They may describe vulnerabilities, control gaps, residual exposure, or indicator movement with precision, but without helping the audience understand the practical meaning behind those ideas. Strong reporting translates specialized knowledge into language that decision-makers can absorb without losing the seriousness of the issue. That does not mean oversimplifying everything until the real nuance disappears. It means choosing words carefully, defining unfamiliar concepts when needed, and connecting the risk to effects the audience can readily understand. A good report helps the reader see the issue, not struggle to decode it. For beginners, this is worth remembering because expertise in risk management is not only the ability to analyze exposure. It is also the ability to explain that exposure in a way that makes responsible action more likely. Context matters just as much as clarity, because a risk statement on its own may not tell stakeholders enough to judge urgency or significance. If a report says that a process has elevated risk or that a control shows signs of weakness, stakeholders still need to know compared to what, caused by what, and affecting what. Context may include recent changes, historical trends, treatment progress, prior decisions, known dependencies, or the part of the business most likely to feel the impact. Without context, a stakeholder may overreact to a temporary fluctuation or underreact to a pattern that has been getting worse over several reporting cycles. This is one reason mature reporting does more than summarize findings. It explains how the current picture compares to earlier expectations and whether the change appears isolated, growing, or likely to persist. For a beginner, the practical lesson is simple. Risk information becomes more useful when it is placed inside a larger story of business conditions, control performance, and timing. That story gives meaning to the numbers and observations, which makes it much easier for stakeholders to judge whether the issue deserves routine attention, closer oversight, or immediate escalation. Another key principle is relevance, because not every risk detail belongs in every report. Some stakeholders need a broad view of major exposures across the organization, while others need a narrower view tied to specific risks they own or decisions they must support. Reporting becomes weaker when it includes too much that is interesting but not necessary for the stakeholder's role. It can also become weak when it leaves out critical information in the name of keeping things brief. Good reporting finds the balance by focusing on what the audience truly needs to know in order to understand the risk and respond appropriately. That might mean emphasizing business effect, changes in risk level, missed treatment milestones, emerging dependencies, or decisions that need attention soon. It might also mean reducing technical detail that does not materially change the stakeholder's judgment. Beginners sometimes think better reporting always means more reporting, but that is rarely true. The strongest reports are usually selective and purposeful. They respect the stakeholders' time and attention while still making sure the most important information is visible, understandable, and hard to dismiss. Timeliness is another major factor because risk information loses value when it reaches stakeholders too late to influence action. A beautifully written report is of limited use if it arrives after a decision window has closed, after treatment delays have already compounded the exposure, or after the business has moved ahead based on outdated assumptions. Timely reporting helps leaders act while options still exist. That does not mean every stakeholder needs constant updates or that every movement in exposure deserves immediate escalation. It means the reporting cycle should match the nature of the risk, the speed at which conditions change, and the importance of the related decisions. Some matters can be reviewed on a steady governance cycle, while others require more immediate communication because the consequences of delay are more serious. Beginners sometimes associate timeliness only with speed, but real timeliness is about usefulness. The question is not merely how fast the information traveled. The question is whether it reached the right stakeholder early enough to shape judgment, support intervention, and prevent the organization from continuing under a false sense of control. Consistency also strengthens reporting because stakeholders need to be able to compare information across time and across issues without constantly relearning what the report means. If every cycle uses different language, different severity logic, different thresholds, or a different reporting style, decision-makers may spend more energy understanding the format than understanding the risk. Consistency does not mean reports must become rigid or repetitive. It means that important elements such as risk description, business impact, trend direction, treatment status, and needed actions are presented in ways that stakeholders can recognize and compare. This helps leaders notice whether exposure is improving, worsening, or remaining stuck despite repeated attention. It also supports trust because people begin to feel that the reporting process is disciplined rather than improvised. For beginners, this is an important point because credibility in risk reporting often grows through repetition. When stakeholders see that reports are structured thoughtfully and interpreted consistently, they are more likely to rely on them in decision-making instead of viewing them as occasional updates with uncertain meaning. A particularly important skill in this topic is communicating uncertainty honestly. Many beginners think a good report should sound confident at all times. But risk management often deals with incomplete visibility, changing conditions, and probabilities rather than certainties. A report becomes more trustworthy, not less, when it clearly distinguishes what is known from what is assumed, what has been confirmed from what is still being evaluated, and what may happen from what has already happened. This matters because stakeholders make poor decisions when uncertainty is hidden behind overly smooth language. If a control review is incomplete, if the likely impact range is still being refined, or if treatment success depends on an assumption that has not yet been tested, the report should make that clear. Honest reporting does not weaken leadership confidence. It strengthens it by showing that the organization is disciplined enough to avoid pretending that unknowns do not exist. For a beginner, this is one of the most valuable habits to develop. Strong risk reporting tells the truth about uncertainty without becoming vague, evasive, or alarmist, and that balance helps stakeholders make more grounded decisions. Visual summaries, dashboards, and trend views can support risk reporting, but they only create value when the explanation around them is strong. A chart may show movement in CRISC, changes in control assessment results, or differences in treatment progress across business areas. Yet visuals alone rarely answer the most important question, which is what the stakeholders should conclude from what they are seeing. This is why narrative explanation remains essential even in modern reporting environments. The audience needs help understanding whether the picture suggests stability, deterioration, improving control, increased exposure, or simply a temporary variation that does not yet change the organization's risk position. Beginners sometimes assume that colorful reporting automatically improves communication, but visuals can mislead just as easily as they can clarify if they lack context or careful interpretation. A dashboard is a tool, not the message itself. The real message comes from the combination of evidence, explanation, and judgment that helps stakeholders understand how the current information affects business confidence, governance expectations, and the need for action. Another important part of reporting risk information is making sure the communication leads somewhere. Stakeholders should not finish reading or hearing a report and still wonder whether any decision, support, follow-up, or escalation is expected from them. That does not mean every report must end with a dramatic recommendation, but it should make clear whether the purpose is awareness, approval, intervention, oversight, or some combination of those things. A senior leader may need to decide whether to accept residual exposure, fund additional treatment, or elevate the issue to a governance body. A manager may need to address missed milestones or confirm ownership for next steps. A control owner may need to review why performance or consistency has declined. Reporting becomes much more valuable when it helps the stakeholders see what role they play in the response. For beginners, this is a powerful lesson. A risk report is not complete simply because the facts are correct. It is complete when the stakeholder understands both the meaning of the information and the practical consequence of receiving it. There are also several common reporting mistakes that are worth recognizing early. One is overwhelming stakeholders with detail that is technically interesting but not decision relevant, which can make important signals harder to notice. Another is oversimplifying so much that the real level of uncertainty, dependency, or consequence disappears. A third is focusing entirely on negative findings without showing trend direction, treatment progress, or whether the issue is new, worsening, or already being managed. Another frequent problem is using language that sounds precise but fails to explain business impact, which leaves leaders with information they can repeat but not really use. There is also the risk of reporting too cautiously, where serious concerns are softened until they sound routine, or too dramatically, where ordinary control weakness is presented in a way that creates noise and fatigue. Beginners benefit from learning that strong reporting requires judgment, restraint, and courage at the same time. The report should be serious without being theatrical, clear without being shallow, and complete enough to support action without becoming so crowded that the action disappears. Trust is one of the most important outcomes of good risk reporting, and it is built gradually through accuracy, honesty, consistency, and usefulness. When stakeholders see that risk reports are timely, understandable, relevant to business decisions, and candid about both knowns and unknowns, they begin to treat the reporting process as a reliable source of guidance rather than as routine administrative output. That trust matters because organizations often face difficult choices under uncertainty, and those choices are better when the people making them believe the information in front of them has been presented thoughtfully and without distortion. Trust also makes future communication easier because stakeholders are more willing to engage, ask questions, and act when they believe the reporting is grounded and fair. For someone new to risk management, this is an important final perspective on the topic. Reporting risk information to stakeholders is not a side activity after analysis is complete. It is one of the main ways risk management creates value, because risk only influences decisions when people can understand it well enough to take it seriously and respond wisely. As all of this comes together, the core lesson becomes very clear. Reporting risk information to stakeholders means translating exposure, control conditions, trends, treatment progress, and uncertainty into communication that supports better business judgment. The work depends on knowing the audience, selecting the information that matters most, presenting it clearly and consistently, giving it context, and making sure stakeholders understand what decisions or responsibilities now deserve attention. Done well, risk reporting helps organizations act earlier, allocate attention more wisely, and avoid the dangerous comfort of incomplete understanding. Done poorly, it turns important analysis into noise, confusion, or false confidence. For a new learner, the most important takeaway is simple but powerful. Risk management does not create real organizational value when it stays inside technical analysis or governance documents alone. It creates value when the right people receive the right information in a form they can understand, trust, and use to guide action before uncertainty turns into loss.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.